So much, if not all of your work, touches on questions of identity and the sense of connection you feel to your homeland here in Cayman. Many of the works from that older series that I referenced, the Blue Meridian series, make actual references in their titles to fixed coordinates of latitude and longitude that correlate to locations of personal significance to you and generations of your family. So can you put that work kind of in context with the pieces you're making today and sort of how it fits into this broader practice that you've developed over the past several years?
Well, I mean, it took me quite a few years after art school to sort of try to find my work, voice, whatever you want to call it. I think because I chose glass as a medium and it has this long history of process and technique. In fact, a lot of the work kind of comes out of contemporary glass artists. A lot of the work of contemporary glass artists comes out of the processes. I was just making other people's work for, I don't know, 5-6 years before grad school. And I kind of had to sort of sweat out that Venetian kind of practice. I always knew I needed to make my work. I remember reading somewhere that a writer writes about what they know, and I always had that feeling, but I didn't know what it was because I sort of kept being pulled in other directions to make work that was sort of very glassy. But I look at that back now at that work as sort of being training for process, like technique, so I could have the toolbox to kind of make whatever I wanted. And I think once I got that toolbox, then I could start to make work that was my work. But it took a long time. And so now when I teach, you reference my teaching practice, I try to see if we can shortcut that somehow. I don't think it's the best way to take the long route around. I don't think you need to go through the glass practice to get to making your work. It just so happened to have been my path. But when I discovered my work, it did revolve around this sense of identity and being a Caribbean person of sort of a mixed race background. That's a weird identity anyway. First off, we're mid-Atlantic, so we're between sort of Europe and colonial powers and the New World. So you're already sort of stuck in the middle of nowhere, kind of. Cayman was anyway. And I felt that my artistic sensibilities were sort of stuck in that same sort of place, having this tradition of material and process from Italy, from Europe, and that stretches back to the time of Christ, like 2,000 years of glass blowing. Having that as the thing that I'm drawing on, but also having no connection to that past at all, then how do I take this material and that I love, clearly love, and want to make something with it that spoke to me, and then I hope to other people from here. So I think a long way to answer your question is, the broader part of my practice is trying to be true to where I'm from, and that sense of being truly, I feel both itinerant and sort of definitely, one of the diaspora. I can't make my work where I live, but my work is about where I live. And I don't know if there's anything sort of more Caribbean than that, really. So the new work was kind of came out of a place of being locked down in the States during the pandemic. And it was the time of the Black Lives Matter riots. And, watching that on TV and social media and doing more research than I had before, I sort of thought, mixed race, I understand the issues that are faced by, my African-American brothers and sisters. The American government considers me African-American somehow. Actually, I know it precisely how it's because of an old, outdated law called the one-drop law. If you had one drop of African blood in you, then you were African-American, which was specifically designed to keep people from owning property, from inheriting property from their slave masters. We didn't have any such law in the Caribbean, by the way, which is one reason why brown and black people can own property here. They did inherit it from their colonial masters at certain points. So I was doing all this research and sort of realized I have to make work that acknowledges this past. I grew up with wild cotton growing in my backyard. There was only one reason I was here, and only one people who grew it and farmed it. So I started sort of thinking about not just work like my older work, the Blue Meridian series, which is about sort of being Caymanian and living here and growing up on the water with my grandfather and listening to these sort of seafaring maritime heritage stories and living that life. But then going back even sort of further and trying to make a work that was about my own story in a very authentic way that didn't borrow from that story in North America, because it's not the same. It's part of it, but we were here first and our experience is different. So how can I make work that speaks to that, the kind of collective experience of the African diaspora, in a way that meant anything to me that was, sort of real and authentic.
And as you said, your early education, or perhaps the subtext of your early education, was finding your voice. And that's something that every artist, musician, writer struggles with and strives for. And for me, what you've achieved in this new body of work is a more authentic voice. It's also one that is more reflective of the way the Caribbean looks today, the way culture is diasporic, is transnational, is transcultural. And perhaps that's partly the experience of living in the States and seeing these echoes, these similarities, and these differences with, say, the Black American experience, the Caribbean experience, and somehow going back to earlier history, as you do with your ground basket pair, where you're looking at these sort of iconic symbols of Caymanian culture, the ground basket, this humble utilitarian object that for so many years was the way people carried produce to and fro and, bore this burden on their back, either many, hundreds of years ago when we had slavery here and well into the 20th century. So for me, this is almost a new project, a 21st century kind of meditation on what it means. Maybe I'm projecting, but for you can speak to this, but what it means to be Davin Ebanks in 2021.
Yeah, no, I think for a while I was looking for a way to push the work in a different direction, and it's easy to, especially in glass, it's easy to get caught up in process and technique. And so for a long time, a lot of my newer work was, which, that Blue Meridian series for me still isn't done. I still have more work to make in that series. But a lot of it is tweaks on technique and tweaks on color and tweaks on scale. It might not necessarily be a new message, really, and so I haven't let go of that, but also at the same time, I have been for a while very aware that, there needs to be some new sort of influx of some sort of energy into the work. And sort of being locked down and sort of stuck with your thoughts for like 3 months. I wasn't allowed back into our studio. I mean, we were completely, even just to go get our papers to be able to teach remotely, we had to have like security escort us, which is crazy. But so, that forced moment of pause, because it's easy to continuously move, go into the studio every day and do something. But I think then to have that, well, one, I got lucky in that I had a solo show coming up. So I had something to work towards. That's huge. Sort of, if I was to give advice to any, young artist, it would be make sure you've got something coming up, because you kind of need that pressure. Because for me, I'll never finish work if I don't have that. I will just keep working on the same thing until, what I need is a studio manager that can come and take it from me and go, it's done. Just let it go. It's done, and put it out there, because I'll just keep messing with it. But if I have that compressed deadline, not that I'm waiting for the last minute or anything, but it gives me that kind of focus. I need to do this. And so the work for that show that you referenced at the Sculpture Center, some of which ended up here, went through lots of iterations, many of which I didn't feel were authentic, and that were borrowing too much from that other story. That isn't. It's a continuation of the story of the Caribbean, person, but it's not the same. So that was the tough part. It's really easy to make work that's civil rights and Black power, but that's not my experience here.
Mm-hmm.
So how do I make work that acknowledges some of that history, but it's authentic to where I'm from and who I am and what I know to, or what I'm learning about my past.
And it seems from your other work that's in the biennial, Passages Triptych, which is a very complex work. Part of your practice is study, is you've read Caribbean literature, you've kind of revisited or gone back to this history, and you've used it as inspiration to create new stories and new work. So we can't see that work. It's on display in the lower exhibition hall, but we're gonna we'll have some images for people to see. Can you talk about the kind of iconography of that piece? I mean, it's very striking. You're using color, and when I was thinking about your work, someone who's not expert in glass sculpting, we can maybe go into some of the minutiae of the process of how you make these objects.
Yeah.
But color is normally the preserve, perhaps, of painters more traditionally, but color features so strongly in your work. But also some of the symbolism, these materials that you're alluding to, it's all glass, right? But it has this almost invitation to touch, this tactile quality. And of course, some of the objects, the plantain, the banana, these rife with kind of connotations. Could you talk about that piece?
Sure. So the Passages piece came out of being sort of inundated with images of the, sort of the iconic image of the slave ship with bodies sort of stacked in it. And that's sort of everywhere. And of course, during the first part of the pandemic, Black Lives Matter, there was all these sort of amplify melanated voices, hashtag stuff on social media. And I of course, familiar with that image. And it just got my mind sort of thinking, and this is, none of art is sort of like a formula where it's, sort of A plus B equals C. It's more like A plus B equals yellow or something, right? It's like good creativity is a quantum leap to somewhere else that isn't where you sort of started, but you still have to do that sort of groundwork, right? So I'm thinking about these things, and at the same time imagining or remembering sort of being in a boat with my grandfather, sort of maybe laying on the bottom of the boat looking up at this sort of framed sky of this like endless kind of blue, and imagining sort of what a voyage like that from somewhere being moved as a human being as a commodity, shoved into a space and moved to another place, that journey. And I felt that the journey, more than the sort of destination or the results of that destination, was kind of more of the Caribbean, at least for Cayman, that story. And so those pieces sort of came out of that. To me, it's a deconstruction of a voyage. You have the bodies packed into a tight space. And, if you've ever let a plantain get totally ripe to fry, it's this like insanely textured, almost fleshy thing, and of course it's in that banana shape, and there's just so many things there, and it turns this weird, like deep, rich black, and it has those flecks of gold still left on it. And I couldn't, not be drawn to that texture and wonder, could I capture that and contrast that? And at the same time, thinking about the cotton that I referenced earlier. So I just bought some cotton online. You can buy raw cotton. It just comes in a bag of cotton. Doesn't look anything like cotton that grows wild here, but I was in a pandemic and Cayman was shut down. You can't really hey, can you mail me some stuff from Cayman? No, okay. And figured out a way to make molds of cotton, and that to me became the clouds. And then the blue, just the blue glass is either water or sky. And I just thought to myself how referential to an arched Gothic church window that boat image is. And what if I made that more direct? Because there is a massive connection between sort of religion and slavery and that for lack of a better word, white supremacy connection to religion. My dad's a preacher, not anything against that, but because of that, sort of reflecting on those connections. So to me, that work was like the closest I could get to using some of that iconography in a way that felt like I wasn't trying to tell anybody what to think about this. If you know some of that history, if you know what that image is, anybody who does know that image, I have a colleague who's a African art historian, and that's the first thing he thought of. He was like, this is these black bodies jammed into this space. And I was like, okay, yeah, good. That's exactly what it was to me. I don't expect everybody to get that. I like it when my work can be multiple things at one time. It's a window, it's a boat, it's a ship or whatever. I don't want it to be any one thing, because then I think it's too on the nose, and it's too telling, rather than sort of presenting a thing and then letting people bring to their stories, their thoughts on that. And they're not going to be far off of what my intention was. But I think if I'm too heavy-handed, then my intention overrides everything, and then you sort of see it and go, okay, I get it, and walk away. And I don't think that good art does that. I'm not saying that's good art, by the way, just to be clear. But I'm striving to make good art, and I think good art keeps you interested in asking questions.
For me, this work sort of oscillates between the material and the immaterial, because I think about memory, and we talked about, try to imagine what it would have been like on these slave ships, but this sort of the fragmentary quality of memory, looking through a porthole, if you had the luxury of being able to see outside, and just getting these snippets, these impressions of blue, or a small slice of sky, looking up, and that sense of being transported elsewhere, the rocking motion of the boat. So, sculpture has this embodiment in a material form, but there's all these other qualities that I think your work somehow miraculously makes us feel. The sense of space, of these intangible qualities. To give them material form is perhaps the highest compliment for an artist. When we've discussed Bendel, the award that you've won now, the Bendel Heights Award, in his late abstract canvases, this idea of an artist setting themselves this almost impossible, Sisyphean task of, I'm going to try and capture water or air in a material form. And but your work is very material. So perhaps, before we end, can you walk us through what does it look like in the glass studio? How do you make an object like this?
Absolutely. So before I answer that question, I'll say that the thing that you mentioned about space between two places is where the title of Passages came from. Sort of thinking about the multiple meanings behind that word passages, which is why I chose bits of either Caribbean or African American or African poetry. It's a passage, and so is you're talking about the Middle Passage. Yeah. So I wanted there to be that reference, but again, not directly, and again, that a word that can mean multiple things, just like the artwork can mean multiple things. So I thought I had to reference that because I like that thing that you said referenced almost exactly the title. So
we were talking about process. Just for our audience who are not experts, and there's not many glass sculptors on island, or people who are versed in how you handle this medium, this molten medium, this dangerous medium, this magical ingredient that somehow is transformed, into these objects. And transformation, I think with these works, they have this luster to them, the ground basket pair, this sheen, that is confusing. Are they metallic? Are they thatch? Are they glass? And it's only on closer inspection that we start to kind of suss out the material property of what it is we're actually looking at. How do you make something like that?
So the baskets are actually one of the process of making that physical object in glass is actually quite quick. It's all the lead up to that. So I've got to get a basket, and I had a Caymanian lady make a basket for me. I have no idea how to make a plait and sew basket, even though I watched my grandmother make them my whole life. So I commissioned her to make one, which I happened to get very lucky and pick one up the last time I was home, which was like in February, right before everything shut down. Took it back with me. Luckily, they packed really well. You just unfold it, give it a day, and it's back to normal. Figure out a way to make a mold of it that wouldn't destroy it or destroy the mold. That was the trickiest part. What material? There's all these different mold making materials. And I knew I would need to take multiple shots at this. So figure out a way to make a mold of it, make a wax from that mold. So basically, almost like you pour, water into an ice cube tray and you make a mold inside of the ice cube tray. I'm doing the same thing with wax. I put that wax into plaster. It's more complicated than that, but basically plaster around that wax. And heat it up, the wax melts out, and I have a negative space that has all the texture and the shape of this basket. The beautiful thing about using wax is I can take the wax when I cast it. I don't cast the wax solid. It'd be like casting a hollow ice cube, but it's wax, so it's soft. I can bend it. I can deform the wax, and so I can, at every stage of the process, I have an option of manipulating it. Then I take that plaster mold that has the interior shape of the basket, heat it up to about 1100 degrees Fahrenheit, which is about twice as hot as your oven can get. And I take 2000 degree glass, blow a bubble. I have a whole team of people, maybe 4 or 5 people, because it's very heavy. What you're seeing here is about half of the material. The other half is on the top, and it's been cut away, and I've cut and ground the top of this to that shape. So it's a lot of material. It's heavy. It's very physical. You have a part of your team bring the mold out of the kiln. It's 1100 degrees. I have my really hot bubble. It's probably 2400 degrees. And I drop it into the mold, and then I blow like hell. And that glass at that temperature is, I'm trying to think of what the consistency in Cayman would be. Normally in the States, I would say like honey, but in Cayman, honey is really liquid. So if it would be like honey if you took it out of your fridge, it's if you try to pour it, it's flowing, but it's flowing really slowly. If I, put my finger under it, the honey would hit my finger and flow around it. If I could somehow freeze that, it would capture the shape of my finger. That's what the glass does. I blow it into this mold, wait about 5 minutes. It freezes up. We break it off of the blowpipe and put it back in the kiln where it cools down for about 2 days. It takes about 2 days to cool down for something that size. And then when it's done, I cold work. Cold working means cutting and grinding with diamond tools. Cut and grind the glass. And then I silverize the inside of it. You might also hear people talk about mirrorizing, something that's not really a word. But it's the same process you use for making a mirror. It's silver nitrate solution that you put on glass. So this is a very traditional object, even though it doesn't look like it. Borrowing from how many ever centuries old tradition of mirrorizing, silverizing something, and whatever the centuries old, actually 2000 years old tradition of blowing into a mold with glass, and then just adapting it to do what I want.
Well, these are fascinating objects, and they're going to be on display until the end of this exhibition, Reimagined Futures, which runs until the 27th of August this year. And we're hoping as well that in due course, these works, certainly this piece, will end up on display as part of our national collection.
That would be wonderful. I'd be honored.
Thanks very much for speaking with us.
Thank you so much. Yeah. Wonderful questions. Thank you for